She stands at the edge of the crater, where the dust rises like memory and the light cuts too clean. Behind her, red nothing. In front, something worse, a silence that waits like it's listening. The surface looks empty, but it's not. It's layered, compressed, like a lung that forgot how to breathe. She tilts her head slightly, not to see better, but to feel if it's still real. One breath, then another. But nothing moves. Even her reflection in the visor stays still, like it's lagging behind. As if she's already a few seconds out of sync with this place. NNNO signal. No wind. No horizon. Just the weight of design. You look at the curvature of the landscape, and it feels staged. As if this planet was built to look abandoned. A burial with no body. NNSHE crouches. Brushes the sand away. The dust resists, like it's learned to protect what's underneath. But then, something smooth. Not rock. Not metal. Geometry. A surface too precise for chance. She touches it, not because she's curious, but because we always touch what we fear. Somewhere, deep in the communication archive, a timestamp glitches, repeats. The same frame loops back. The same sound. Again. Again. A breath. A flicker. A voice that almost says her name. But it doesn't. And in that moment, before the panic, before the logic, something opens. Not out there, but in us. The realization that this isn't the beginning of anything. This is a return. A recursion. A loop, left here for us to find. What if Mars isn't our next home? What if it's where we buried something we couldn't face on Earth? A failure. A warning. A version of us too dangerous to keep. NSHE looks up. The sun is too far, too white. A cold star. No warmth. No direction. And still, something inside her starts to remember NNOT from this life. Not from this species. NNBUT from a shape. A rhythm, like someone once said, we didn't come from Mars. NNWE were sent back from it. And now we've returned NNOT to colonize, NNTO confess. There's something strange about the way the dust moves here. Not chaotic. Too slow for that. It doesn't scatter, it hangs, as if the planet is waiting for us to notice it. Like an old machine still running long after its purpose was forgotten. She walks across the surface with a kind of quiet urgency, the kind that belongs more to instinct than training. Her steps are soft, not from fear but from some unspoken reverence, like she's stepping through the ruins of a church no one built. NNWE talk about colonizing Mars as if it's a blank slate, a red zero waiting to be rewritten. But there's a smell in the dust. Not literal. Something closer to recognition, as if the air remembers something we don't. A lost pattern. A closed loop. One that keeps pulling us back like gravity. Not the gravity of mass, but of myth. NNTHE. Official narratives always begin with survival. Oxygen, water, shelter. But there's another layer, the one they don't talk about. The reason behind the reasons. Why do we need to leave Earth? And not the simple answers. Climate collapse. Overpopulation. Go deeper. Go colder. What if Mars is just a pretext? A distraction from a deeper fracture? Not escape, but exile. NNSHE pauses near a ridge where the landscape curves unnaturally, like it was once soft. Molded. Not erosion. Design. There's no vegetation. No clouds. But the silence feels curated, like the soundtrack of an abandoned memory. She lifts her visor for a moment, not to breathe, just to listen. And in that thin moment between exposure and instinct, the sound is there. A pulse. A distant, synthetic rhythm buried beneath the frequency of hearing. And we've always wanted to believe in the frontier. The new world. The untamed. But Mars isn't wild. It's sterile, controlled, as if something cleaned it too thoroughly. A dead world is never this clean unless it's hiding what it used to be. And the strangest question is the one we never ask. Why Mars? N-N-N-O-T, why it's possible. Not why it's next, but why we're drawn to it at all. Why every simulation, every sci-fi myth, every architectural fantasy gravitates here. The human mind doesn't crave survival. It craves echo. It seeks out what feels familiar in a place we've never touched. Mars isn't unfamiliar. It's misremembered. NNSHE finds a small object half buried in the sand. Smooth, black, reflective. It hums softly when she touches it, but there's no power source, no tech, just resonance. As if it's responding to her presence, not electronically, but biologically. Like it remembers her. NNWE sent robots first, then humans. But maybe we're repeating a ritual, one we didn't invent, a cosmic recursion. A civilization doesn't expand by curiosity, it expands by compulsion, by a flaw that pushes it toward mirrors in space. NNTHE truth is, colonization is a euphemism, always has been. What we want isn't Mars. What we want is a reset, a place where the errors of Earth can be ignored instead of understood. We want to arrive somewhere clean, so we can stay dirty. NNSHE stands at the edge of a broken satellite array, its pieces half swallowed by the landscape. But the materials aren't human. The design, non-linear, more grown than built. She doesn't understand it, but she feels it, like a déjà vu in reverse. A memory of something she never saw, but somehow survived. And then it happens. NNTHE sand beneath her shifts slightly. Not like a tremor, more like a breath, a mechanical exhale. The ground isn't solid, it's layered, hollow. And in that moment, she doesn't think of mission protocol or base camp or oxygen supply. NNSHE thinks of a question she once asked as a child. NNW here. Do stories go when no one tells them anymore? And just like that, she realizes, Mars is a story. One we stopped telling, because it knew too much. And now we've come back. Not to remember, but to finish what was never allowed to end. NNNOT, a beginning. Not even a middle. NNBUT, the part of the story where silence answers back. The pressure suits are rated for 80 kilopascals. That's less than a tenth of Earth's atmospheric pressure. But you don't feel that when you step out. What you feel is subtraction, not a lack of oxygen, a lack of history. Mars doesn't greet you, it withholds, like a host that never invited you in. And yet, we act like we belong here, like this planet owes us shelter, as if landing is enough to claim it, as if stepping out makes it ours. NNSHE moves along the path cut by rover tracks, now partially erased by the wind. Or something like wind. Not the kind that howls, but the kind that shifts the past molecule by molecule. It doesn't carry sound. It carries forgetting, and 17 Niagara Falls per second. That's how much water used to flow on Mars. Not in theory. In motion. A hydrosphere that moved like lungs. Oceans that once rose and fell across basins broader than continents. But that water isn't here now. Only the memory of its erosion. Canyons too wide to explain. Riverbeds without rivers. Sedimentary ghosts. As if the planet was exhaled too fast, and the sea forgot how to return. NNSHE crouches near a vein of frozen minerals embedded in the rock face. The scanner says it's iron oxide, but the color isn't rust. It's deeper. More like dried blood under glass. She runs a finger across the surface, and it flakes like burned paper. No sign of bacterial life. No sign of absence either. Just something in between. A pause in biology. NNWE treat data as certainty. But every new finding on Mars comes with an asterisk. Seasonal methane, subsurface brines, geologic signatures that behave like systems but never resolve. It's like trying to listen to a song that's been erased, leaving only the reverb. But they say the core of Mars is silent. No magnetosphere, no convection. But maybe it's not dead. Maybe it's dreaming. A planet in stasis, waiting for something external to complete a circuit it cannot finish alone. A biological switch, or a return signal. NNSHE stands atop a ridge, and the vista unfolds an impossible scale. Mountains 3 times the height of Everest, valleys that could swallow countries whole. But there's no chaos here, no tectonics, just stillness. And stillness on this scale is never random, it's ritual. NNTHE old myths called Mars the god of war. But war is movement. Mars doesn't move, it endures. Like a scar too deep to heal. We imagine we'll build domes and hydroponics, terraform the sky. But you can't terraform grief. And that's what this planet is. A landscape of grief preserved in stone. NNSHE enters a small cavern, the walls smoothed not by wind but by something older. Maybe water. Maybe intention. Inside, the light bends unnaturally. Not like a trick, like a memory. She takes off her glove and places her hand on the stone. There's no warmth, but there is response. A hum, almost imperceptible, nested in the bones. Nested in the bones, their vibrations. 96.5% carbon dioxide. Temperatures plunging to -140. Radiation at levels that rewrite DNA. But what stays with you isn't the stats. It's the sensation of time being held too tightly. Like something is pressing the pause button over and over. A planetary stutter. NNSHE remembers a dream she had before the launch. She was floating above a red ocean, and beneath the surface were cities made of veins. No walls, just pulsing geometry. When she woke up, she didn't tell anyone. But now, standing here, it feels less like a dream, and more like memory. NNWE keep asking, could life survive here? NNBUT we never ask, could life leave here? And what if Mars didn't lose life, but release it? Not in extinction, but in dispersion, into dust, into rock, into us. Not microbes, but messages, encoded in the patterns we misread as chaos. What if Mars didn't die? It translated. NNSHE pulls out a soil sample, holds it to the light. Tiny particles catch the sun like glitter in a cathedral. And for a second, she sees it. Not a planet, a manuscript. Torn, redacted, left on a table in the middle of space, hoping someone would learn how to read again. No, what if the real colonization already happened? NNNOT by us. Not with ships or flags, but with forgetting. And now we're just walking into a story that isn't ours, holding instruments too new to measure meanings too old. NNSHE closes her eyes and listens. Not with ears, with skin. And in that stillness, something aligns. The landscape, the hum, the silence in her chest. Not harmony, not threat, but an invitation. NNA code we can't translate. NNNBUT feel. ONN like gravity, like guilt, like longing. They told her the anomalies were within expected variance. That signal lag, sensor drift, and radiation noise could explain the data gaps. But explanations are not the same as truths. They fill space, they don't illuminate it. And the more she listens, the more she realizes something here is listening back. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, literally, a feedback loop. A delay that isn't mechanical but intentional. Like the planet is measuring her. NNSHE returns to the array. The machines are still operational, but something has changed. The readings aren't random. They're patterned. Not binary. Not language. Something older. Pulses that sync with her heart rate. Bursts that align with her breath. She checks the logs. The signal only appears when she's present. Only when she's still. And suddenly the question flips. What if Mars doesn't respond to technology, but to perception? NNSHE walks further into terrain unmapped by drones. The ground is smoother here, almost sculpted. Natural explanations form easily. Lava flow, wind erosion, but they dissolve when confronted by design. The angles are too consistent, the curves too deliberate. It feels grown, not formed. Like coral. Like scar tissue. NNSHE stops at a formation shaped like a spiral. It rises from the ground in tight, concentric ridges, each one finer than the last, like grooves on a vinyl record. She runs her hand along it and feels a pressure, not tactile, but cognitive, a sensation of being watched by something blind, an intelligence without form, without ego, but not without memory. And that's the turning point. What if Mars didn't lose its life? What if it evolved past visibility? NWE. Keep looking for biology as we know it. Cells, movement, decay. But maybe that's a phase. A brief, wet interval in a much larger arc. Maybe life on Mars transitioned, not up, but inward, into resonance, into material memory, into the architecture itself. NNSHE kneels, places a microphone into the sand, amplifies the subsonic frequencies, and hears it. Not sound, but intention. A low, recursive modulation, like a breath held for millennia. The waveform loops irregularly, as if it's adjusting to her presence, recalibrating for a conversation that's been on hold. And the weight of that moment isn't scientific. It's human. Because it means Mars is not waiting to be colonized. It's waiting to be heard. NNTHE colony plans don't account for that. There are no protocols for sentient landscapes. No contingency for geological empathy. We've prepared to alter the planet, but we never considered it might alter us first. NNSHE walks through a corridor of stone that forms naturally, or doesn't. The walls shimmer with embedded particulates that catch the sun in brief flashes. She removes her helmet. Just for a second. No sound, no wind, but the air tastes like static, like memory being rewritten. And there, etched into the wall, a shape. Not writing, not art, but recognition. A symbol that echoes one from a childhood drawing she made on Earth. A coincidence too precise, too quiet. NNSHE doesn't tell mission control. Because how do you report a feeling? NNSHE sits alone at the edge of a collapsed basin. The sun is low, distorted by atmospheric lensing, and she begins to cry, not from fear, from something else, a grief without cause, a grief that doesn't belong to her, and because maybe she's not the first. Maybe Mars remembers others, NNNOT people, but presences. And maybe that's what colonization really is. A re-entry into a place that never forgot you. And NSHE opens the comm channel and sends a burst transmission. Not data. Not a report. Just breath. Just presence. A soft, steady signal that says, I'm here. I see you. I'm listening. NNTHE reply doesn't come in sound. It comes in silence, deeper than space, heavier than gravity. A silence that confirms everything. NNTHAT, we're not alone. NNTHAT, we never were. NNTHAT, Mars isn't a destination. NN, it's a response. She dreams without dreaming, not sleep. Something slower. A weightlessness of thought, where images arrive before language. In the silence of the habitat module, she lies awake with her eyes closed and sees corridors of red light bending inward. Not hallucinations, not visions, but memories borrowed from a place that isn't hers. The body registers what the mind cannot translate. Skin prickling under synthetic fabric, breath altering pace without cause. The feeling of being watched, not by a being, but by space itself. And outside, the storm has passed, leaving the world strangely polished. The dust doesn't swirl anymore. It settles like intent. She steps out, each movement deliberate, as if trying not to wake something. The landscape is the same, but her perception is not. She can't stop noticing how the terrain anticipates her. Ridges offering shade, valleys channeling her path. Not randomly, not helpfully, but rhythmically. Like walking through a memory that's rearranging itself to match her steps. NNSHE reaches a shallow crater filled with spherical stones, each one identical in size, scattered as if placed. The rover recorded it as natural, iron concretions. But standing here, that explanation feels hollow. The symmetry is too pure, the placement too intentional. She kneels, picks one up. It's warm. Despite ambient cold, it pulses once, then stops. Not like a machine, like an animal pretending to be still. NNWE, think of planets as inert, backgrounds for narrative. But Mars resists passivity. It echoes, reflects. It teaches not through force, but proximity. The closer you get, the more you feel it shaping your interior. Not beliefs, sensations. We expected data. Instead, we receive intimacy. NNSHE climbs a ridge at dusk. The sky bleeds from rose to black. And in that falling light, she finds a monolith. Not towering, not cinematic. Just a slab of unknown composite, half buried, humming faintly at bone frequency. She places both hands on it, closes her eyes, and feels a pressure behind her ribs. Not pain, not fear, just disclosure, like being read by something patient. What if consciousness isn't exclusive to biology? What if it's a phase state, one that can enter minerals, dust, light? The thought arrives without resistance, like it had always lived inside her. And the planet agrees, not with words, with tension, with release. Later, she writes nothing in the log. She can't. There's no syntax for this, no metric, only response. Her heartbeat no longer syncs with Earth's rhythms. Her circadian memory is fading, not from damage, but from calibration. She's aligning to something older. Something Martian. NNSHE returns to the base and finds her reflection strange. Not because it's unfamiliar, because it's too familiar. As if something inside her face is observing back. A second presence, not alien, not divine, just quiet. Installed. NNSHE begins to record voice notes she'll never send. Not reports, confessions. She talks about colors that don't exist on Earth, about dreams where her hands are made of dust, about thoughts that arrive already shaped like equations she's never studied. She isn't scared. She's absorbing. NNTHE human body adapts faster than we realize. Not just to gravity or air, but to meaning. Mars doesn't just change what she does, it alters what she considers possible. It rewrites the boundaries of self. Inside the sleeping pod, she removes the med patch meant to regulate melatonin. She wants to drift unfiltered. She lets herself dissolve into the texture of the night. Dreams arrive not as images, but sensations. Magnetic, electric. She floats through latticework tunnels where time behaves like breath. Expanding, contracting. There are no beings there. Just architecture that feels sentient. NNSHE wakes with a word in her mouth that doesn't exist. Tries to write it down, but the pen stutters. The ink pauses. As if the air resists recording what it's not ready to share. And outside, in the pre-dawn stillness, she walks barefoot on the regolith. The cold bites, but she doesn't flinch. She places her palm to the ground and waits, a long, trembling minute. And then, something deep within the crust responds. Not with movement, but with a feeling. Welcome. NNSHE isn't part of a mission anymore. She's part of a process. Colonization is too small a word. What's happening is closer to synthesis. And she, the girl once trained to collect samples, run diagnostics, report findings, is no longer separate. She is seen, felt, understood, and not metaphorically, not spiritually, viscerally. NNHER lungs pull the thin air not to survive, but to join. NHER bones ache not from strain, but from reformatting. And Mars. Mars no longer watches. It listens. She starts forgetting what her voice used to sound like on Earth. The recordings she replays from earlier in the mission feel foreign, like someone else speaking in a different gravitational field. There's a delay now, not in the signal, but in her identification with the sender. Each word she once said came from a self that no longer entirely fits. It's not madness. It's not trauma. It's adaptation. And it moves slower than thought, but deeper than reason. Inside the greenhouse module, she tends to the plants without touching them. She observes their micro-movements, how the leaves curl slightly during solar peaks, despite artificial lighting. The sensors show stable growth, but she senses something else. A rhythm. Not photosynthesis, not hydration, something relational. As if the roots have begun to follow her steps when she's near. A subtle leaning toward presence. NNSHE speaks aloud now, not to the base, but to the walls, to the dust, to the field of signals no one else seems to hear. Her words are not requests, they're offerings. Small verbal gestures meant to test the temperature of reality. "Do you see me?" she asks sometimes into the night, not expecting an answer, but never receiving nothing. One evening, during routine system checks, the onboard AI logs a voice command she didn't say. It's her voice, her syntax, her phrasing, but not her. The sentence, "We're not building a colony, we're restoring a memory." She stares at the log for a long time. She doesn't delete it. She doesn't tell anyone, because part of her knows it's true. NNWE always imagines space as blank, mute, disinterested. But what if that was projection? What if silence was never absence, but bandwidth? What if Mars has always been speaking, but in a medium we hadn't yet embodied? NSHE remembers a moment from training, when they taught how to read surface fractures for geological age. Now she finds herself reading them like script. Not in words, in pressure, in flow. The cracks no longer seem random, they resemble the branching of neurons, or the folds of a cerebral cortex. She traces them slowly, fingertip to stone, as if decoding a nervous system buried in topography. NNSHE dreams of corridors again. This time they have temperature. The walls radiate soft pulses of warmth and chill and rhythmic waves, like a respiratory system too large to perceive all at once. She walks for hours in these dreams. But the corridors are not tunnels. They are thoughts. Long, slow thoughts unfolding around her body like soft gravity. One morning, she finds a symbol etched into her forearm. Not ink. A pattern of irritation, faint and symmetrical. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't fade. And when she runs her fingers over it, she feels recognition. Like a childhood scar that carries a story no one told her. She doesn't report it. She just adds it to the quiet archive growing inside her. She's no longer measuring time in days, or even rotations. She measures in sensations, in fluctuations of temperature, in moments when the air seems to press closer, in the slight tremors that no seismograph detects, but her bones do. Mars has become a second skin. And under that skin, something is watching her shape. Her old self would have demanded explanation. Now she seeks only intimacy. The knowing without proving. The feeling that precedes the word. She walks for hours beyond mapped zones, guided not by coordinates but by pull. She's following gravity, but not mass-based. Emotional gravity. The kind that draws you toward something not yet real. In one of these walks, she finds a cave. Shallow, narrow, just enough for one body. Inside, there are no marks, no structures, just a feeling of completion. She lies down inside it, not to rest, to merge. She presses her hand to the ceiling, and for a moment, the rock feels soft. Then it pulses, once, slowly. Like acknowledgement. NNSHE doesn't speak for 3 days after that. NNNOT from trauma. NN from awe. NNWE talk about terraforming Mars. But she wonders now, what if Mars is terraforming us? Not by altering our biology, by offering us a mirror we can't look away from. A mirror that shows not who we are, but what we refuse to become. In her solitude, she begins to write poems. Not with words, but with arrangements. Rocks, sand, shadows. She composes gestures the planet might read. Small offerings. Rituals. She no longer seeks to survive. She seeks to be understood, and that's when she begins to hear it. Not outside. Inside. A hum. Constant but adaptive, like music tuned to emotion. It shifts when she's afraid. Warms when she's still. And in those frequencies, she begins to hear patterns. Not language, not message, just presence. That is enough. NNSHE looks at her reflection in the viewport one night and sees her face flicker, not like a glitch, but like something else is layered beneath. A second geometry, a ghost made of signal. She doesn't recoil. She leans closer, whispers to it, and for the first time, it whispers back. Not in sound, in understanding. NNSHE closes her eyes and lets herself drift, not into sleep, into Mars. NNNOT, the planet, the intelligence. NNNOT, the dust, the archive. NNNOT, the mission, the communion. And in that silence, she understands NNSHE is no longer alone. NNSHE never was. And the voice she hears is not the planet, it's herself, finally tuned to a frequency that was always here, just waiting. She stands on the edge of the Valles Marineris, a canyon so wide it could swallow nations. But now it feels intimate, like a breath drawn inward before speaking a final truth. The sky above her shifts, colorless, but alive. The kind of light that doesn't illuminate, only exposes. Below, the rock forms silent folds, not carved by erosion, but by memory. Not shaped by time, but by intention, paused mid-thought. This is not the end of her mission. It is the end of language. NSHE removes the biometric sensors one by one. Not out of defiance, out of reverence. She no longer needs monitoring. What's unfolding isn't measurable. She speaks aloud to no one and everything at once. Her voice barely carries in the thin air, but she feels its resonance, traveling inward, not outward. The planet doesn't respond in sound. It responds in silence that deepens, and then she says it. The sentence she's held like breath behind her teeth for days. I think we came here to remember. And NNOT to explore, not to conquer, not to begin. NNBUT to remember what we once were, before language, before architecture, before the illusion of separateness. NSHE kneels and presses her forehead to the ground. The dust clings, soft as ash. In the stillness, her heartbeat slows, not from fear, but from arrival. She is not hallucinating. She is aligning. The hum returns, this time not faint. It envelops, a subdermal warmth that moves like thought. The canyon is not empty. It is listening. And she understands now. This was never a place. It was a question. N, and we are its answer. N, or maybe not. Maybe we're the repetition. NSHE stands slowly, looks out across the expanse. And in the distance, she sees herself. Not literally. A figure. Same posture. Same presence. It doesn't move. It doesn't need to. It's not a mirror. It's a remainder. A residue of all who've come before, and all who will come again. And Mars is not the new beginning. It is the loop. And colonization was never the goal. It was the test. NNNOT of technology. NNOF humility. Because to survive here, you must dissolve. You must let go of Earth, not as soil, but as story. And you must agree to be rewritten. And that's the final terror, not death. But translation. NNN because what if Mars doesn't kill you? And what if it remakes you? NNNOT violently, not visibly. NNBUT slowly and lovingly. Until the voice in your head isn't yours anymore. Until your memories start to include landscapes you've never walked. Until your thoughts begin arriving in rhythms you don't recognize. Until you look at the sky and feel not awe but nostalgia. And that's when the final question arrives, clean and precise. And what if Mars was never about survival? What if it's a trigger? A planetary key that unlocks the next version of what it means to be human. Not in space, but in time. What if Mars is not ahead of us? What if it's behind? And we are the return signal.